Hey everybody, welcome to the Gentleman Scholars Club. Today we're talking ties,
Jack can't talk tie.
specifically the construction of ties and their structure, their innards, their folds, their linings, their tipping, and things like that. If I were a professor in the STEM fields or in the sciences, I would talk about this perhaps as dissecting ties or reverse engineering them. Since I'm in the literature field, I'll describe this as deconstruction. However, before you get too excited, I'm not going to be tearing apart any of my nice ties, but I may be poking in there, folding some things back, exposing some things as we talk about the structure of ties and how that contributes to the way they look and the way they wear. So let's get started. So when you buy a necktie, they're usually categorized in one of two ways. In simplest terms, they're either lined or unlined. A lining is essentially the piece of fabric that is placed between the exterior folds of the tie. Right? So on this necktie, you have obviously the front of the tie, you have the back of the tie, and in between here there is an invisible lining. I think it should be called an interlining because it exists in between the two layers. And it's not easy to tell if you have a lined tie, but there are some clues. First of all, it's not easy to tell because the lining doesn't extend all the way to the bottom. So if you turn it around and you kind of open it up, you can't really see whether there is a lining there. This is tipping, and that presence of tipping can also disguise the lining, so you can't really see it. One way to tell if you have a lined tie is to kind of take the fabric like this and roll it between your fingers. And this is a similar principle to testing whether you have a canvas suit jacket or a sport coat. Grab the fabric and you sort of roll it and see if you can detect that lining inside. This one does have a lining and I can feel it there. Linings benefit the presentation of the tie because they add some weight to it. So according to the laws of gravity, returning to a little bit of the science anyway, it just adds more weight to it, and so the tie will lie smoothly and cleanly on your shirt front. On the other hand, if you don't have a lined tie, the tie will be more airy. And that's a term that's commonly used for unlined ties. They have an airiness to them. That might be beneficial in the summertime if you want to look more casual. The tie will tend to perhaps move around more, blow around more if it's windy, whereas this one that has more heft to it and more weight because it has the lining, among other things. Airy, unlined ties tend more towards sprezzatura, which is the idea of casual nonchalance while still dressing well. And as I said, it might be suitable for summer when you don't want to convey the idea of wearing a lot of fabric or carrying a lot of weight on you and it's hot. Having an airy tie also goes along with that sort of feel, right, that summertime feel. So that would be a reason to go with an unlined tie. Lined ties, again, more formal, more weight, kind of a cleaner front. And with a grenadine tie, which this is, right, the grenadine is an open weave. It's kind of a gauze-like weave. And so the presence of the lining in between actually prevents the light from showing through, and therefore you can't see the mesh-like quality of the tie. Right? I don't have any unlined ties. I think they're fairly rare, but I do have one that conveys sort of what I mean in terms of the tipping, at least. This is another grenadine. So same sort of material. This is a grenadine garza fina, which is a fine gauze. This is a garza grossa, which is more of a large gauze. You can see there the patterns are different. And check out my video on grenadine ties for more comparison of those two weaves. But this is the garza fina, and you can see there at the bottom how it is transparent, or fairly so, right? You can see right through it. And it's not because it's unlined. There is a lining up here, but that sort of effect would be similar to what you'd have all the way through the tie if you had one that was completely unlined. So whether you want to have that sort of mesh-like look in the summertime is up to you, but it does have that casual nature to it. On most ties that have any sort of quality, the lining will be made from wool. If you have a shitty tie, a cheap tie, you'll find that lining made in polyester. I would avoid that. You can also hear about ties being made with silk interlining or cotton. Don't find that to be too common. I believe most of mine are wool, the ones that I've investigated anyway. Besides feeling around for the interlining, we can actually take a look at it and see it. So here's a nice tie with some linen in it, a summer tie. It has a lining in it. I can feel it if I just roll my fingers through here. And that usually ends roughly where the keeper ends or where the tie starts to split off at the slip stitch right there. So we'll fold that back and you can find some of the lining showing right there. Right? So this is white contrast lining and it feels sort of like felt. And it's a wool. It's a wool felt. It has a nice feel to it actually. And you can see it there obviously because it is white and because this tie has no tipping, no covering over here, which I'll talk about momentarily. But you can sort of feel in there and identify that, or you can actually see it. Here's another tie. This is a grenadine, another grenadine Garzofina from Shibumi Firenze. And we'll open the back up again, and you can see the lining peeking right there. So most of the time you don't even see that. This one is interesting. Garza Grossa grenadine from Berg & Berg. And if you roll that back, you'll find there you see the interlining on the inside. And this one is actually, looks like two layers cut into a Y or a V shape. And again, it ends roughly here where the slip stitch is and where the fabric starts to fold away. So different linings right there. The second aspect of tie construction I'd like to talk about today is tipping, and you've seen some of that already back here. In this case, and in most cases, the tipping is simply an additional type of fabric that is put on the underside of the tie tip, and it covers the back of the fabric so you don't see the underside of the cloth. In this case, it's white, and it's a complementary contrasting color to the outside of the tie. The material itself feels like a cupro, which is similar to what you would have on a jacket lining. Right? I haven't looked into what usually makes up the tipping fabric when it is a standard tip, but that's what it feels like here. There's another tie from Suit Supply, paisley, and gray and blue. And on the back, you see that the tipping is simply done in a navy of a similar type of fabric. This one is interesting. It's a window pane tie from Bogi Milano. And the tipping in this case is actually like a holographic material with the brand printed on it. Not my favorite, but you can see the different possibilities there for standard tipping of ties. What does a tip accomplish? It kind of finishes off the tie, makes it look polished, makes it look done, covers up the back of the fabric, like I said, if you don't like to see that. On the other hand, it becomes more formal, and it's also sort of standard. So having either a self-tip tie or a completely untipped tie is more along the lines of what a menswear connoisseur or aficionado would be interested in. Self-tip tie would be something that has tipping made from the same fabric as the exterior of the tie. Among my 50-plus ties, I have none of them as self-tipped. Some people consider it wasteful because if you're using the same fabric as the tie in an area that no one will see it, it's kind of a waste of that fabric, a waste of money. On the other hand, it prioritizes beauty. It shows that beauty is paramount for the wearer or owner of that tie. And it shows that money is no object because having that additional silk there or whatever material the tie is made out of doesn't matter because the beauty is the first consideration. Don't see too many self-tip ties. I don't have any myself. I tend to have those that are regular tipped and those that are untipped. And my higher end ties, more luxury ones, or the so-called better ties, are untipped as well. It might be because I lean toward wearing more casual style tailoring, that I've chosen these unconsciously. So I'll show you what that looks like now. So this is another Shibumi Firenze tie. It's a nice rust Glen check pattern. It's rust with brown as the check. And on the back, you'll see that there is no tipping whatsoever. You can actually see the back of the fabric, which is different than the front. What does this accomplish? It gives you a sense of the workmanship of the tie. You can see its construction. You can see its guts. You can see under the hood as you would a luxury car. You can see the amount of handiwork or handcraft that's gone into making the tie. And most untipped ties come with hand-rolled edges. Right? That's the edging that goes around here. And these are rolled by hand and then sewed in such a way that you can see the craftsmanship there. Harder to do this and make it look good than to simply apply a layer of additional fabric and sew it down. Right? So having that gives you a sense of the extra time, effort, and craft that went into an untipped necktie. On the other hand, something like this, which is not hand-rolled, it's simply sewn down. You'll see it doesn't have the same sort of rounded edge. It's just kind of flat along there. So maybe it doesn't look as good. Some people might consider it more polished. But again, for the menswear, classic menswear connoisseur, the idea of the artisanship, the work that went into it is usually more important than having it look more formal and finished. And those who privilege sprezzatura, which is the art of looking well-dressed, but also like you didn't try, is more in line with the untipped sort of tie. Third consideration in terms of structure is the number of folds on a tie, and those are usually broken down into either 3 or 7. You may have heard of 5-fold ties, 9-fold, 11-fold, but the two basic categories, 3-fold and 7-fold. 3-fold is your standard tie, and it refers to the number of folds the fabric takes to kind of close off or make the shape of the tip. And I'll show you a standard 3-fold tie right now. This is again the Shibumi Firenze. Nothing wrong with the 3-fold tie, perfectly good quality, but you'll see there the fabric has been folded 3 times to make it close up. 7-fold tie, again as the name implies, contains 7 folds at the underside. And this is a 7-fold from Tie Your Tie, which is the brand run by Kenji Kaga, who also runs the brand called 7-fold. And this is broken down into 7 folds that make up the construction. You can see that there. I'm not usually able to count how many folds there are really well, but you can see for sure there are more than on the 3-fold tie. And those come together like so and drape like that. Right? So some people say the 3-fold tie is perfectly fine. Others find the 7-fold again to show more artisanship. It's very difficult to make a tie with 7 folds and make it look good. It also requires more fabric because you're using more silk or whatever fabric the tie is made out of to construct that at the end of the tie. Therefore more expensive and therefore more desirable as well for that artisanship, the artisanal work and that handicraft. Many people say that the 7-fold tie hangs better than a 3-fold tie. And I would say definitely if you get one that's not lined, rather not tipped, and even not lined, it might be important to have that extra weight that the 7-folds give over a 3-fold tie. It's definitely be less airy, less flyaway than a 3-fold that also doesn't have tipping, like this one. Right, so this is, let's bring that over here. This is really light. You can see through it. It's a perfectly fine tie, good quality, excellent quality, but more casual and light and airy because it is merely the 3 folds, also untipped, and has a very light lining in it. It is lined though, and you can see the quality or the kind of the appearance that it has. Right, great for summer, great for relaxed classic menswear like a sport coat. It works in a suit as well, but has that greater casualness. The 7-fold, on the other hand, is more refined because it has that extra weight. And hand rolling usually goes along with 7 folds as well as with the untipped tie structure. You see that here, again, a beautiful hand rolling to it. So that essentially covers the nature of tie construction. a little nod to a couple things at the back, one being the slip stitch, which is this kind of big stitch that holds the folds of the tie together. When it is kind of loose and casually done, it's usually seen to be more handcrafted again, and that's highly desirable. Just a minimal stitch to keep the pieces together, but enough to let it move a little bit. So the slip stitch, something else to look at. And then lastly, the keeper of the tie, which I mentioned earlier in the video, and that's where you're supposed to put the back blade. With most men who follow classic menswear, do not put the back blade into the keeper, because again, it creates more of a really business-like, super polished look. And if that's what you're going for, and you want to keep those two blades together, then that's fine. If you want to go with a more rakish sprezzatura approach, where you're being more casual and you're showing that you're not overly concerned with polishing up your appearance, then it's customary to kind of leave that back blade as is. And sometimes it splits and sort of flies around or lies like that. But that is part of the aesthetic, that sort of casual, rakish sprezzatura aesthetic. So you can determine for yourself which approach you prefer. Hope that was useful in illuminating some of the structures and innards of neckties.
Jack can talk tie. Jack talk tie very well.
Please like the video and follow us at Gentlemen Scholars Club for more similar content. Thanks for watching.